Alright, so this is a 2020 Silverado Z71 T1. Have the 5.3 with the 8-speed, and what I have that I'm going to be trying to work on today is a leak at the adapter for the transfer case where it connects to the transmission. You can see there's a little droplet coming there, but it's been leaking for a little while. Got moisture all over the transfer case. So didn't know if it was the input shaft seal for the transfer case or the output shaft seal of the transmission that was leaking. So I put dye in and put the dye in through the fill hole. Sorry, it's a little bright. There you go. So that's the fill hole. That's the drain hole for the transfer case. I put dye in the fill hole. Checked it a couple days later, and there was dye staining the underside of the transfer case, which you're able to see with a black light, which I don't have on me right now. So that let me know that it was a transfer case seal leaking. So bought the transfer case adapter gasket, which is going to need to be replaced. That's the part number for it. And the transfer case input seal here, that's the part for it. Figured while I had it out, might as well replace the transmission output shaft seal. And sorry about that. There you go, that's the number for that. And again, this is the 5.3 with the 8-speed. Depending on what transmission you have, some of these parts are different. Part numbers are different. But basically, the process here will be to get to. Alright, so before we get started, I mark the alignment. Well, basically it's alignment marks to make sure that when I reassemble this, I'm putting it back in the same order that I got it in. If you don't, you can mess up the harmonics, get vibrations, increased wear and tear. So we mark it here, as you can see. It's a redundancy, but I also mark up here as well. Make sure you do it on the prop shaft as well. The prop shaft goes into the front differential, or rather connects to the front differential. Don't put it here because there's actually 3 washers here that will actually come off. But you want to do it there. And also, once you remove this clamp, you'll pull this boot back and you make a mark there. That way everything, you know how it's supposed to be aligned, and when you go to put everything back in, you'll have a much easier time getting it lined up and knowing where everything goes and sits, and you don't create any funky harmonics or vibrations or increased wear. Alright, so I'm going to have to eventually drain the fluid out of the transfer case. I'm going to remove the shield first just so it's not such a mess. The socket size for the shield is 15 millimeter. So I have a bad habit of losing bolts and nuts, so I generally try to put them back. That way I just don't have a bunch of them laying around. I'm guessing later what goes where. So you have your input here, your output here. This is going to be a 5/16 Allen head. I'm probably going to make an absolute mess of this. So it actually doesn't look too bad. I do have 80,000 miles on it, actually 87, almost 88,000 miles on it. I was hoping to change it about 75. It doesn't get really hard use, so if you check the owner's manual, there's an interval in there for regular use and hard use. The truck does get used. I get probably 4-wheel drive at least once a week, so it does get used, but it's not hard, so I'm not too worried about the interval on it. And again, the oil doesn't look too bad. Still more red than brown. I think that's pretty good. Most of it out, so put that back in there. And it does look like it was low. I have added oil ATF to it, but it does look like it was getting a little low. But I'm not going to tighten this back up all the way because take a closer look at it a little bit later. Put a little bore scope in there, make sure there's no metal. So now that we've done that, going to disconnect the bolts here. These will be 15 millimeter as well. And again, make sure you mark or indicate one of them. That way you know you can put the shaft back on appropriately in the right orientation. And give me a second to get set up here. Not there, at least back broken. Maybe they'll back off. All right, so it's the 4 bolts. Sorry. 4 bolts. Slide the drive shaft forward just a tad because there is a lip used for alignment right there. And so you got to slide it forward a little bit, and then it comes right out. You just pull it. Once you slid it a little bit off of that, drop it down just a little bit, and it pulls right out. Output shaft doesn't look like it's leaking or anything, and there's no residue around it to indicate it, so that looks good. So next thing we'll do now is disconnect the propeller shaft. So I have to remove this clamp. Dadgum. Sorry guys, I'm horrible with this. Move this clamp right here. Once I remove that clamp, there'll be 6 bolts here, and they're washers. There's 3 washers, 1, 2, 3, 2 bolts per each washer. Remove those, and then this should come out the same way. All right, so I think you can see them there. The camera might drop, but those 6 bolts, they are 10 millimeter bolts. Alright, try something a little bigger. And as you can see, everything I've taken off so far has had some type of thread lock on it. I don't know if you can see that. So you're going to have 3 pairs of these that come off. Each pair has 2 bolts and what they're calling a washer. But you have 3 of those for a total of 6 bolts, 3 washers. And that's what it'll look like once you've got it removed. Alright, so I didn't have room enough to push the propeller shaft up and push it forward because there was an O2 sensor right here. It's now removed, and it's the rear O2 sensor, but that gives me enough room now to push this up, push it forward. However, before you do that, you take off the front clamp, which I've already done. It was right here. That's the front clamp of the transfer case. You pull it back and you'll see the splines of the shaft. So what I'll do is I'll mark the propeller shaft. I'll mark the propeller shaft and I'll mark the splines. That way I know they're lined up when I put it all back together. Alright, so it's now been marked. I don't know if you can see it, but the 2 splines have yellow paint on them and yellow paint here as well for marking. We'll see if it should just pull right out. Well, didn't quite pull out exactly as the instruction said, but there we go. And you can probably see the yellow mark right there that I'll use to line everything back up. Can't see that too well. Get a flashlight. And that's what that. There you go. That's the front output shaft of the transfer case. Looks like it's got some anti-seize on there, which is good. Came off really easy. Wasn't seized up at all. So now we have rear drive shaft out, the front propeller shaft out. That's what it looked like where it goes into the front differential. So now what I'll do, I'll put a transmission stand up under here to brace this, and I'm going to remove the cross member. Once I remove the cross member, then I'll get another brace, or a stand rather, to support the transmission, and then we'll disconnect the transfer case and get it out. Alright, so because the transfer case is still bolted to the transmission is still bolted to the engine, there's not you need to support it, but it's not like you have to have it braced off at 3 different points or anything. So I have the weight supported here, just enough to get the cross member out, and then I'll put another one of these stands on the transmission to alleviate the weight. That way nothing is stressed. When you pull this cross member, basically 6 bolts are going to be needed. You have these 2 up here. You can see that one. And this one, and that's what actually mounts the transmission mount to the transmission end of the cross member. So those 2, then you have 2 on this side, which bolts the cross member to the frame rails, and you got 2 on this side, which bolts this side of the cross member to the frame rails. So first thing I'll do is take those off at the top of the transmission mount, and then I'll take these 4 off here. Again, these are 15 millimeter. I don't know what size these are, but when I start taking them off, I'll give you the socket size. Okay, so I've removed the 2 bolts that go from the mount to the transmission itself, transmission housing. I'm now working on the cross member. These 2 bolts here, 21 millimeter or 13/16. 13/16 fits real snug. On bigger bolts, I'd rather it feel snug. The socket feels snug, either the rings feel snug than a little bit loose. On the back side, the bolts are kept on with nuts here. These nuts are also 21 millimeter 13/16. I'm gonna go with 13/16, unless I just have trouble getting everything off, or getting the nuts off once I get the bolts out. But yeah, so we'll do those 4 and drop the cross member and get a better look at everything, and that'll allow me room to get a stand under here and put it up, and put another stand under here under the transmission to support it, and then disconnect the transfer case and replace the seals in it. Alright, so the cross member is out. Now you can see the transfer case just about in its entirety. Output shaft. I mean, I'd heard you could do it without pulling the cross member, but I have no clue how you'd get to this nut here without doing so. But oh well, I'll let somebody else try to do that. So that's it. It's basically about ready to come out. I may have to pull the actuator. We'll see as I go. It's a cross member, the 4 bolts, and that's where it would attach to your transmission. This is your transmission mount. The 2 bolts attached to the transmission here and here, and they all come out pretty easy. Alright, so got the transfer case out. This seal here is sticking pretty good. You have to get a razor blade to pull that off cleanly, but that's out. But more importantly, the seal's good in there, and over here on the transfer case. You can see where it's leaking, and that's our leak. So thankfully that's it. Transfer case, everything looks good. Things good. The instructions say you need to pull the actuator off. Did not need to do that. Just have to finagle it a little bit, but it'll work. So I'm gonna clean up the gasket and put a new input shaft seal here. You'll see that. And once we got the new input shaft seal in, we'll install everything back up.